I would like to greet you here today. What a wonderful day we have, and what a great speaker we have. We're very fortunate to have with us Bob Morgan, the President and CEO of the Charlotte Chamber of Commerce. Before you start your lunch, I would like to use this opportunity to thank our sponsors, Arriva, our major sponsor of this event today. Thank you, Arriva. CPCC and Dr. Tony Zeiss, thank you for sponsoring this program, Tony. And Garfinkel Immigration Law Firm, thank you very much for sponsoring this program today. Take care.
My name is Joe Redmond. I'm with Arriva. And as I thought about what I was going to try to say today to introduce our distinguished speaker, I thought, what could I say that would really be impactful, that would resonate with the current events? So I thought I would just bring an empty stool here, sneer at it, and talk gibberish for about 20 minutes, But my vice president there advised me against that. So, but honestly, this election is really, really unbelievable. It's going right down to the wire. It's a coin toss. And I actually read an article on the internet, and it was very interesting. The writer postulated a scenario where the electoral vote could be a dead tie, and he went into excruciating detail and expounded in preposterous proportions, almost state by state, county by county, and said it could be a dead heat. Luckily, we have the 12th Amendment of the Constitution, which in that case, the Senate, I should say the House of Representatives, would select the president. As a Republican majority, the House would likely select Romney. The Senate, which has a Democratic majority, would select the vice president. So theoretically, we could have, I couldn't make this up. But I said, that's a win-win. I mean, first of all, Romney would get the White House, which is probably the only house in America he can't afford to buy, and Joe Biden would get the luxury of endless meetings where he could have spontaneous laughter while the president debates in cabinet meetings and what have you. So I thought it was this perfect solution. So I think I need to get back on track with the introduction for Mr. Bob Morgan. Bob has a distinguished career with the Chamber of Commerce, starting back in 1991, when Bob first started with the Chamber of Commerce. And during his various positions since then, he's been a continuous advocate of business development, economic expansion, and prosperity for the Charlotte region. Under his guidance and reign, since the Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of the Charlotte Chamber of Commerce, we have seen an exponential growth in the energy sector here in Charlotte, to the point where Charlotte is now recognized as a worldwide energy hub. And that's a tremendous accomplishment. And Arriva, as a worldwide company and a world leader in nuclear and renewable energies, is very proud to be part of this Charlotte energy hub. And with the local business partners here in Charlotte, we look forward to forging a new energy markets, not only for the U.S., but for abroad. So we're really happy about that, and we have a lot of thanks to Bob. Bob is a graduate of Independence High School here in Charlotte and graduated from the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. And I would like you guys to welcome me in giving Bob a warm welcome. Thank you, Bob.
Good afternoon. I'm going to be in this same hotel Saturday night for the YMCA's Dancing for a Cause, following Kevin Pitts, who was part of the inaugural class last year. I'm going to try to embarrass myself less today than I will Saturday night, if that's okay with you. But great to be with you. Thank you for the opportunity. I see so many friends of mine, friends of the Charlotte Chamber, and I see so many of you who know so much more about this subject than I do that I hope I can do it justice and share with you any unique insight that you don't already know. I'm obliged, as head of the Charlotte Chamber of Commerce, to recognize Larry Dagenhart, a former chair of the Charlotte Chamber, who I know is a long-standing member and leader within the World Affairs Council. I'm particularly pleased to see folks like Daryl Hallnagel, who we helped to recruit with Continental General Tire back in the mid-90s, Larry Polsky with Coltech Industries. Most all of us have moved here from elsewhere, whether we were involved in a Chamber of Commerce related move or not. And it's really the story of Charlotte and what makes this community so great. I want to commend the work of the World Affairs Council. LJ, your energy and leadership in keeping a focus on the importance of the rest of the world to Charlotte as we grow is very inspiring, and I, again, appreciate your passion. I had an opportunity to take my family on a cruise of the Mediterranean, Italy, France, and Spain this summer, and was reminded through that experience of what it means to open our eyes to the rest of the world. And in some of my reading as part of that trip, I came across an old Tuscan adage that was related during the time of the Renaissance to the idea that artists and others from Florence and Tuscany usually ended up in Rome. There was an old adage that I think just says it all. How much the fool who goes to Rome excels the fool who stays at home. And perhaps that's part of the spirit of the World Affairs Council as you bring others from around the world to Charlotte for the rest of us to see and hear and learn from, but also as you take people from Charlotte out into the world. Today I'd like to focus on three things. One, give you just kind of an overview of some of Charlotte's competitive advantages as we go about the business of selling Charlotte. I'd like to address the question of are we global or globalizing, and look at some of the specific data related to the international components of our economy. And then I'd like to just reflect a bit on the DNC that was not too long ago, but that presented some pretty unique opportunities to help promote Charlotte to the international community. As we go about the business of selling Charlotte, in any sales, it's all about competitive advantages. We have several of them. I'm going to go into some detail on a few of these, not all, but our workforce is large, it's skilled, it's growing, it's increasingly young. Our cost of living, our transportation and connectability to the rest of the world, the diversity of our economy, our educational systems, particularly our community college, and Dr. Zeiss is another great and inspirational leader, and one who we were reminded of, Mary, in New York City last week when we heard the folks in New York talk about how disconnected the private sector and the public sector are from the work of the community colleges there. We hear that in other cities. That's not a problem in Charlotte, where we have a community college that is better connected to the real world of what's happening with companies and employees than perhaps anywhere. We have a government and a governance in this community that has served us very well, that is a competitive advantage as we go about the business of selling Charlotte. Let's talk for a second about the growth that we've seen. Any natives in the room? Okay. These folks are getting more rare every day. Cal Carduce, I don't believe that. I know you've been here a long time, but Charlotte in 1980, there were 400,000 people actually in Mecklenburg County. By 2000, that number had grown to almost 700,000. As we sit here today, it's just shy of 1 million people. 400,000 to 1 million people since 1980. We think you look ahead to 2020, you're talking about 1.2 or 1.3 million if current growth rates continue. If you look out over 20 years, our metropolitan area today of 1.2 million, we think is going to grow to something north of 4 million people. Sobering number, represents a lot of opportunity for companies to grow with that kind of population growth and to make money and create wealth. It also presents enormous challenges, most particularly as it relates to transportation and our ability to move people and product in and through this region. You know that over the past decade, our metropolitan area was the fastest growing in the United States. We have the 5th highest migration of young educated workers in the nation. And I'm going to go into a little bit more detail in terms of the international growth. But here's a number for you. The Hispanic growth in our market since 1990 has been 1,572%. 1,572% growth in the Hispanic population since 1990. One of the fundamentals that we sell, in addition to workforce that's a competitive advantage, is Charlotte's cost of living, something that we can never take our eye off of. If the national average is 100, New York City is 233, more than twice the national average. Atlanta is 96, and Charlotte is 94. It is very affordable to live and to run a business in this market, and again, something not to take for granted and something to keep our eye on in creating advantage. There perhaps, you've heard this said many times, perhaps nothing more important to our economy and our economic growth than the Charlotte Douglas International Airport. In the last 3 years, a new 3rd parallel runway has been built. There's an intermodal yard that is under construction. We have service to over 35 cities, global cities, daily direct service to over 35 cities, including most of the major European capitals and a large number of Caribbean, Latin American, and now South America is served through the daily flight to Brazil. The sectors that drive our economy, some interesting numbers to contemplate. Banking continues to bring more wealth into our economy than any other, with a payroll of $5.34 billion annually, $5.3 billion annually. And yet healthcare is the largest employer, with more than 90,000 people employed in healthcare versus 52,000 people employed in finance. Retail trade is a significant employer. Tourism is a growing employer. We remain competitive for manufacturing, and professional services is a sector that continues to grow and bring more wealth into our economy than it exports. Here are some big numbers for you. Since 2002, over a 10-year period, almost 7,000 companies have announced either the relocation or the expansion of 57,000 jobs. 57,000 jobs through companies either relocating or expanding, representing 100 million square feet and an investment of over $10 billion over the last decade. One of the sectors that is growing, again, if healthcare is 90,000 jobs, banking is 55,000 jobs, the energy sector is growing. There are over 200 energy sectors employing over 23,000 employees. More than 5,000 jobs have been announced just in the last 4 years, and that's largely because Duke Energy, as the nation's largest utility, is an anchor that has attracted other firms like many of you who are in this room and our sponsor here today, and others who see an opportunity not just to do business with Duke, but to serve the global industry, the energy industry globally from Charlotte, largely because the talent is here. I remember 4 or 5 years ago, Toshiba announced a major expansion, a couple of hundred jobs, primarily nuclear engineers, and I asked the CEO from Japan, why Charlotte? We were competing against Houston and Atlanta, both of which have daily direct service to Japan. We don't. And he said, Bob, it's simple. You have the talent here. I can either hire nuclear engineers who are already here, or you're an easy place to recruit to. So the energy sector is one that we think offers tremendous opportunity to continue to grow. Great to see the partnerships that have developed from institutions like Central Piedmont Community College, like UNC Charlotte, and EPIC, the Energy Production Infrastructure Center that is under construction, and energy will be a bright spot going forward. We do remain a manufacturing center. Easy to forget sometimes when we think of ourselves as a banking and corporate headquarters type economy, but we have the fourth largest manufacturing center in the region, over 1,100 manufacturing firms, and we've seen over 4,200 new manufacturing jobs added in just the last 4 years. And if you don't think that manufacturing is alive and well in Charlotte and even in the U.S., head down 77, bang a right on Westinghouse Boulevard, and drive until you run into the Catawba River and see all of the industrial tax base that exist in this economy and all of the jobs. And if you want to have some fun, ask yourself the question, how would we replace this tax base if it went away? You'd have to build a whole lot of office towers and a lot of subdivisions to make up for the tax base that the manufacturing community provides to this economy. So the question that you all have asked me to address, in addition to just talking about that brief overview of Charlotte's competitive advantages, are we a global city? We've actually invited an academic from UNC Charlotte who came and spoke to us a year ago, and by the academic definition, Charlotte is not a global city. It is what the academics would call in the process of globalizing. And some of the numbers, and again, you're going to be familiar with a lot of these. The Charlotte Airport, again, over 650 daily flights to 170 cities. 35 of those are international, European, Latin American, and Caribbean primarily. The number of foreign-owned firms in Charlotte, 635, which is an increase, almost triple the number from 2000. In the Charlotte region, including the 16 counties, almost 1,000, 958 foreign-owned firms, many represented here at lunch today. Germany, of course, was the first. Actually, it was a Swiss company, Sandoz Chemicals, that came in the 1920s manufacturing sulfur dyes to serve the textile industry. But Swiss and German, very, very close to Germany, more German companies than any other, with 127. Then the United Kingdom, Canada, Japan, France, Switzerland, the Netherlands, Italy, Sweden, and Australia. We continue to see tremendous activity from Europe, particularly from Germany, and have reasons to believe related to what's happening in the European economy, but what's also happening in energy policy, that we're going to continue to see increased growth from Central Europe. The foreign-born population in Charlotte since 2000 has grown by 74%. The foreign-born population has grown by 74%. In 2010, there were 120,000 people amongst us who were born outside of the United States. More of those people have come from Latin America than anywhere else in the world, 62,000. Some of the growth percentages are quite impressive. The growth of those born in South America over the last decade, 142%. From the Caribbean, 91%. From Latin America, 88%. From Eastern Africa, 76%. South Central Asia, 180%, a higher percentage than from any other part of the world. And from Eastern Europe, 94% growth in our population. And so again, those are the statistics, those are the numbers that the academics would look at. If London is the ultimate a global city and its ability to attract people from elsewhere. Charlotte is in the early stages of that process. And another academic term that gets used is that we are an emerging gateway city, a city that is welcoming and succeeding in attracting people who are born elsewhere. Let me shift gears now and talk about the unique opportunity of the Democratic National Convention that LJ and many others of you were a part of. The Chamber of Commerce in Charlotte is not a partisan organization. We don't have a political action committee, and we frankly had no interest in what took place inside the arena. We had every interest in making sure that Charlotte was successful in hosting this convention. We had every interest in maximizing the opportunity to tell the Charlotte story from an economic development perspective, whether it was to the delegates or to the members of the media or to the corporations that were here to be a part of the activities of the DNC. We also, as a city, were very fortunate to have hosted over 350 representatives of foreign governments. And many of you met former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, chair of the National Democrat Institute, which was the host of those 350 representatives of foreign governments. By the way, there's a Republican counterpart chaired by Senator McCain that did the same thing in Tampa. We were asked on the Monday of the convention to put some tours together, and about 150 of their guests participated. A third went to see some of our educational assets, a third went to see some of our energy assets, and a third went to visit some of our healthcare assets. It was a unique 4 hours to show and tell them what we wanted related to Charlotte. 99% of these folks had never been here before, but they are now back in their home countries with generally having had a positive experience. The usual suspects, the developed countries that you're all familiar with, were there. There were also countries that I've never heard of. Now, I know all of you know where Burkina Faso is, right? This crowd should know. Most crowds that I speak to have to Google it like I did, but the former Upper Volta of West Africa even had representatives here in Charlotte, members of parliament, leaders of political parties, leaders of trade unions, and we actually had the Prime Minister of Zimbabwe who was here, and it was quite a treat to be able to host all of those folks. Madeleine Albright, in the months leading up to the convention and in inviting us to be a part of that process, talked about the transactional opportunities that a week like the Democrat National Convention presented. And she encouraged us to be aggressive in pairing these representatives of foreign governments with corporations in Charlotte that do business in their countries and to conduct some business in addition to the tours that were held. I was standing at a reception that Monday night at Charlotte Country Club for all of our foreign guests, standing behind former Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi, listening to a gentleman who stepped up to her, said, "Madam Speaker, I'm the Speaker of the House from Guatemala, and it's a pleasure to meet you." And that happened right here in Charlotte, North Carolina, a connection that was made that week. The ambassador from Great Britain, who was here for the week, made the chamber his home office, temporary home office, during the week. Just the week before, I had gotten a call from Chuck Allen of U.S. Airways asking if the chamber would be willing to support U.S. Airways' request of the European Union to switch from flying from Charlotte into Gatwick over to Heathrow Airport for the increased international connections that airport has. I said, "Chuck, we'd be glad to write a letter and send it to Washington and to Europe, but how would you like to meet with the British ambassador the week of the convention and have the conversation directly? Because the British government's point of view will be taken into account strongly when the EU decides this," a transactional opportunity that took place. I had Michael Gallus, you all know Michael Gallus, I'm sure, called me a couple of weeks before the convention, and he said, Bob, we have to get to Istanbul. Istanbul is apparently, as many of you have told me, it's one of the hottest cities to visit now for what's happening with their economy and the potential for opportunity for our two countries to do business together. There's an international arts festival next year that I'm told does a great job of leveraging the arts to create economic development in Istanbul. We were able to put Michael and some folks from the arts community together with members of parliament from Turkey who were here. Again, transactional opportunities that we were able to take advantage of. We had one unique request. One delegation asked us to introduce them to French women in Charlotte, and Cal Cardew said, Bob, I'll do whatever you tell me. I said, Cal, don't do that on behalf of the chamber. That's but one of the more surreal moments. I'm not an academic, and I don't know the answer to the question, are we global or globalizing? But I think these numbers that I've shared with you would suggest that we clearly are becoming more global every day, with the companies that are moving here, with the people and the talent they represent that are moving here, with the opportunities that things like the DNC have presented us, and again, which now have sent thousands of people back to wherever they're from with a positive impression of Charlotte, many of those people wanting to get back as soon as they can. So we'll let the academics deal with that. I want to assure you that as it relates to the Charlotte Chamber of Commerce, we think there's tremendous opportunity, and we are trying to position ourselves to be even better at leveraging the opportunity to bring foreign investment to Charlotte. I am very pleased to have with me today, as I conclude here, some of my teammates from the Chamber. Many of you might know Eileen Kai. Eileen joined our staff more than 5 years ago. She is an economic developer. Eileen is a native of Shanghai. She speaks fluent Mandarin. The foreign direct investment from China to the U.S. is small right now, but it is increasing. There's a debate in the economic development world. Many think the growth will be exponential going forward. We want to be positioned with the knowledge of China and the relationships of China and elsewhere in Asia, and Eileen gives us that opportunity. Lourdes Zapata is here. Lourdes works with Natalie English in our public policy area at the Chamber. Lourdes was born in Peru and brings a Latin American perspective to the Chamber team. And then the newest, or one of the newest members of the Charlotte Chamber team is Sven Gertsen. And Sven is a native of Munich. He has replaced Justin Hunt, who this crowd knew very well. Justin served us for more than 17 years. We frankly didn't expect to find anybody who could step into Justin's shoes quickly. We figured there'd be a long learning curve, and yet Sven brings experience and knowledge from his past experience that gives him a chance to really do that, and that's with every compliment to Justin and, of course, to Sven. For the last 10 years, he's been in Germany selling the state of West Virginia to German companies. We've told Sven, if you can do that, Charlotte will be a breeze. And our expectations are very high. No offense, I hope, to any of you who might be from West Virginia. Sven also is, his family is international. His wife is from India, and so he has both a personal and professional experience in India. Also have Donna Bixler. Where's Donna Bixler? Donna Bixler is a native of Fort Lauderdale, and won't claim that that's a foreign country, but we are diverse in our representation, and appreciate those folks from our team being with me today. I want to leave you before we take questions. If you all don't have the International Review publication, that we publish at the Charlotte Chamber. Make sure you get a copy. It's available online. It literally, in addition to all of the resources that it includes, it literally lists all of those almost 1,000 foreign-owned companies that do business in the Charlotte market. Help us take a look at that list. There are some companies out there that we're not aware of, and we find new ones every day. You can help us do that. But know that this pays for your chamber membership, if nothing else. It's just a great resource for anybody who's international in their business or thinking here in Charlotte. I hope that is enlightening to any of you, and thank you very much for the opportunity to be here to talk about Charlotte and the globalizing that we are going through. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. And on behalf of the World Affairs Council of Charlotte, I want to thank you for coming here today to give us a little bit of an overview of Charlotte's growth and the globalization and even the D&C opportunities that came from it. And we're going to have a question and answer period here for a few minutes. We've been able to convince Bob to stay for a few minutes. Not Tony, I'm sorry. Bob to stay for a few minutes and talk to us about Charlotte's growth and other questions. So for those of you who do have questions in the audience, we have a microphone right here in the center. If you'd please just come on up, queue at the microphone to ask your question. We'd be pleased if Bob would then address it. And I'll go ahead and we'll start off with the gentleman here who's at the microphone right now.
Yeah, Norm Cohen, Cohen. And Bob, I know you gave quite a in-depth presentation about companies coming into the Charlotte area, Mecklenburg, and maybe even the surrounding areas. But I noticed that there wasn't much mention about exporting. And I think in the company I was affiliated with, I was president and CEO of a specialty chemicals company right outside of Charlotte, and we exported to 37 countries through a lot of special efforts in regard to, especially on my part, because the CEO has to go himself or herself and do that job. I was just wondering what comments you might have about any initiatives that the Chamber might have in helping firms, if any, on exporting their products overseas.
Well, Norm, exporting is critical to the U.S. economy. We all know that. The Charlotte Chamber is not directly engaged in the promotion of exports, largely because our members have not asked us to do that. There are others. The Charlotte Regional Partnership has some export programs, particularly now looking toward opportunities in Brazil. The state of North Carolina is really on point with export promotion, but it is critical to our economy. Siemens, there are a lot of great parts of the Siemens story to our community, one of which is that over the last 3 or 4 years, they've exported more than $600 million in gas turbines outside of the United States. So if there is something specific we can do for your company or for others, we'd like to have an opportunity to talk to you about that. Otherwise, we'd put you in touch with those other agencies. You know them better than I do, of course, with your experience. Our primary focus that we're tasked with from our mission, grow jobs and investment in Charlotte. And so that's where our priority is, and our developers. We are very selfish. We're looking for leads. We need your help generating leads of companies that may be looking at the U.S., may be looking at the Southeast. It's sales 101. If you don't have leads, you're not gonna close the sale. And so that is where our focus is. Well, I don't know that we've seen anything that we can directly tie to that. Clearly, the trend of product is made in Asia. It's increasingly going to come through the widened Panama Canal. More product for our economy comes in and out of the port of Charleston than any other. We took a field trip just a month ago down to Charleston to to see it and kick the tires, so to speak. That port in Charleston is essential to the intermodal yard that's being built by Norfolk Southern on airport property, which will make us a transportation and distribution center as long into the future as any of us can see. My goal, I don't know if we're going to be able to pull this off or not, but I think we need to get a group and we need to go to China and we need to see where it's made. Some of us have done that individually. We haven't done that as a chamber-sponsored trip. At some point, we probably need to get a group and go to Panama and see the product coming through. Tremendous opportunity as ports up and down the East Coast compete to be the recipient of those larger ships. It matters to us whether Charleston wins that competition versus Savannah and Jacksonville, and it's almost certain that Norfolk Southern is going to be in that game. Norfolk, Virginia is going to be in that game, but we need to make sure that Charleston has the ability to dredge its port to the depths that they can bring those ships in. So, Sean, no, we've not seen direct companies. Another trend, just to share with you, it is very common in economic development when you're approaching a national election. There's a lot of activity of companies looking and analyzing Charlotte versus whatever other cities they're looking at. Not a lot of decisions get made in September and October when there's a national election. We saw it in 2010. We saw it in 2008. We're seeing it now. We're confident that once the election is over and once there's some clarity to the future direction of federal policy, that there are some significant announcements to come to Charlotte.
While we're waiting for our next question, I'm going to kind of invoke my Master of Ceremonies privilege and ask, Bob, would you comment, there are many advocates as well as critics on incentives that we wind up giving to companies to come to the Charlotte region. And can you kind of address your thoughts on that and the balance that has to be paid? Because politically it may be unpopular as a taxpayer, some people may object, but how do we balance incentives that we give companies to try and draw them here?
Perhaps we wish incentives weren't a reality of competition, but they are. As long as any state and any community is going to offer incentives, we're going to face the choice of whether to be in that game or not. I think Charlotte and Mecklenburg County and the state of North Carolina have been very moderate in their use of incentives. An incentives deal that is not a win-win for the public sector and for the company that we're recruiting is not a deal that I want to be a part of. And our incentives are generally tied to either the investment that a company makes, the tax base that they will bring, and or to the payroll that they will bring. United Technologies Corporation, the acquirer of the Goodrich Corporation, is bringing 325 jobs with an average salary of $200,000. What is that worth to us in terms of our willingness to incent back to the company some portion of the new income taxes that those employees will be paying to the state of North Carolina? I'm confident that, again, North Carolina is moderate in the use of those incentives. The deals that we've had, certainly in Charlotte-Mecklenburg, have been good. Incentives are performance-based. If the company doesn't provide the jobs that they've promised, if those taxes don't get paid, the grants don't happen. And there are some cases where a company comes in and promises X number of jobs, and they perform to less than that. Well, they don't get the full incentives package. It also happens the opposite of that. Some companies come in and outperform what they've promised, and they don't enjoy the upside from an incentives perspective. But I think we can be confident that there are good business deals out there. Some would suggest that if you simply eliminated North Carolina's corporate income tax, or if you eliminated the personal income tax, that you wouldn't need to do incentives at all. What I've seen in Texas and other states that don't have corporate and or personal income taxes, they still have to be in the incentives game in order to land projects. It's a question of do you want to be competitive or not with other communities and states with whom we compete.
Hey, Bob. This is Jake Hoffberg.
Hey, Jake.
Hey, I just wanted to swing back around to, you had said that the #1 priority was to invest or get investments and job growth here, and I was at the Chamber's panel on Tuesday about access to capital, and Terry Cox was moderating a panel about corporate sponsorships and keeping investments here, and it seemed to be that one of the big frustrations of the panelists was that a lot of the early seed money would go into these high growth entrepreneurs, and that places like Silicon Valley, New York would basically come in and take a lot of our promising startup businesses and losing a lot of our human capital, and that they really felt like that we need to get to a point where we have a critical mass where we can start keeping a lot of our money and our new jobs here in Charlotte. And I just wanted to see if you could just talk a little bit about what's going on with keeping capital local and keeping those entrepreneurs and startups going and keeping our job industry growing.
Well, we talk about that in the context of entrepreneurial development. Large companies, publicly held companies, steal the headlines, they get the lion's share of the attention, and yet entrepreneurs and small businesses are the job creators of the next decade and perhaps more. We have more of them than we give ourselves credit for. We are better at entrepreneurial development than we give ourselves credit for. We are not as good as Silicon Valley and even Raleigh, Durham, and Austin, Texas, for example, just to mention a couple of our domestic competitors. There is a growing recognition that there is a role for big businesses to play in entrepreneurial development. There's a role for institutions of higher learning to play. There's a role for the public sector as well as the private sector. The lingo around this, as you talk about, there's an entrepreneurial ecosystem, the ways that a community supports entrepreneurial development. Those communities that are better at the subject do a better job of linking those components of the system. There's a lot of opportunity for us to get better, and it became a focus of ours this year as a Chamber of Commerce. It's a priority again next year, and I think you'll see it going forward. It is a competition. If I'm a venture capital firm in Silicon Valley and I'm going to give you money for your startup in Charlotte, I'm going to try to tie some strings to that and get you to come to Silicon Valley and to relocate. There's some things about Silicon Valley that we're not going to be able to match. There's some things about Charlotte and North Carolina that California can't match, and we need to know what those competitive advantages are and play to them, and we need to find additional competitive advantages. One of the topics that's going to be on the agenda in Raleigh in 2013 will be the subject of tax reform. This idea that North Carolina's tax structure is antiquated and we need to change it. It generally falls along the lines of we do need to lower the corporate and personal income tax rates, and you do that by broadening the sales tax. I think it's critical that conversation include consideration of how do we treat those high-growth entrepreneurial companies wherever they are in the state from the perspective of helping them to compete with those other locations that have different competitive advantages. But at the end of the day, and it's the question I get asked more than anything, why do people come to Charlotte? Whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you're a large company, it begins with three fundamental advantages that we have. A workforce that is large and growing and skilled, and we need to continue to be the kind of place that attracts people who want to live here. The cost of living, that's 93% of the national average. We need to fight to keep that cost competitive as it is currently. And then accessibility. It's our transportation network, how we move people and product, how we grow our airport. And so as we focus specifically on entrepreneurs and others, I think it's critical that we not lose sight of the bigger picture, that if we take care of those three things, we're going to have a chance to attract all of the above and to be competitive going forward.
Question?
Excuse me. I'm starting to come down with the code, but I'm going to try to be clear as possible. My name is Charles Vicala. I'm a CPCC student. Excuse me. You spoke in your presentation about the analysis of Charlotte as a global city, whether or not it's an international city. I'd like you to touch on some points as to what they were looking at to determine, if you could. But what really brought me to the microphone was to give you a scenario as to how the Charlotte Chamber could be a resource to creating international flights, a direct flight to a particular city. Like, what would you guys do in terms of developing it with, would it be an economic development component? Would there be certain thresholds or bullet points that would need to be met before you consider pitching a particular city? If you could talk about that.
It's all about demand, and someone will approach us and say, boy, it would help our business if we had a direct flight to destination X. And U.S. Airways is looking to make money, and where there's sufficient demand and traffic to make money, then they are opportunistic about that. We're fortunate, being a hub airport, that it's not just our local demand that drives that. It's also the ability of U.S. Airways to bring in people connecting from elsewhere onto whatever that destination is. But some of the locations, the Brazilian flight to Rio de Janeiro, go back, 25 years ago when the first flight to London was launched. It was the business community primarily that came together to say there are those of us who travel back and forth, and we don't like transferring through Philadelphia or New York. And it's fairly easy for the airline to quantify what that demand is. And so, again, I would say as we focus on making ourselves attractive, we will continue to grow, and with that growth will be the demand that will help us help them to continue to expand. I alluded to in my presentation, and I would say that one of the ways for us to become truly global, for all the 35 flights we have to international destinations, we do not currently have daily direct service to Asia. I don't know that that's something that's going to happen anytime soon. You may have had Jerry Orr before this group sometime recently. Jerry has long said that a U.S. Airways match with American Airlines would benefit Charlotte because American's network generally is so much larger than U.S. Airways, but in particular, American would give us one-stop service to Asian destinations. And of course, we're all watching intently as U.S. Airways and American may be coming together through a rather unorthodox kind of way, but worth watching for the increased international accessibility that potential merger could bring.
Bob, on behalf of the World Affairs Council, I want to thank you for your comments here today and your ideas on how Charlotte is growing and your observations of the Chamber, and we appreciate all the work that you and the Chamber do for the Charlotte region and growing the business here. And so thank you again, Bob, for being here today.
Thank you.